Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Eliana Kernodle. The presidential debate Tuesday night in Philadelphia focused on immigration, abortion, and crowd-sized at campaign rallies. What went under-discussed, however, was a topic close to the heart of Pennsylvania's economy, energy. Joining me with more on this story is the Center Square's Pennsylvania reporter, Anthony Hennon. Anthony, how did energy figure into the debate this week?
Not very much, really, when you look it over. This debate went about an hour and a half. We only had one brief exchange focus on energy. And given that this was hosted in Philadelphia, it's no surprise that it centered on fracking and who does and doesn't support it. Kamala Harris, when she was running for president back in 2019, said that there was no question I would ban fracking. But by 2020, she had disavowed that stance as Joe Biden's running mate and sees it as a crucial thing. When this popped up in the debate, Harris argued, "I made that clear in 2020. I will not ban fracking. My position is that we have got to invest in diverse sources of energy so we reduce our reliance on foreign oil." Trump, of course, argued that this was basically smoke and mirrors and that on day one that she would go in and ban fracking and basically bring the oil and gas industry to a halt. But we didn't really get a lot of deep engagement here beyond fracking or oil or gas, especially Pennsylvania specifically. Fracking is not, it gets some oil production, but Pennsylvania is not a major oil producer in the U.S. Pennsylvania is a huge producer of natural gas, the second largest in the country, only behind Texas. And it's also, we've seen some discussion broadly in the media that almost as if fracking is some third rail in Pennsylvania politics. But it's really not. When you're diving into public perception of fracking, it's actually fairly split as far as support and opposition. A 2022 poll found that 48% of Pennsylvanians support fracking and 44% oppose it. That's not to say that people don't think it's a major economic boost for the state. 86% saw natural gas industry as important to the state's economy, but there are concerns about public health, safety, environmental harm. So it's not so black and white here in Pennsylvania, and I think Pennsylvania, just as a crucial part of the PJM grid, which covers 13 states, the District of Columbia, and 65 million people, how Pennsylvania approaches energy and energy production in the future is really going to have some national ripple effects.
And Harris also pointed to the Inflation Reduction Act as sort of proof of her stance. What's kind of the story there?
Yeah, so she was arguing basically as the tie-breaking vote to pass the Inflation Reduction Act that this has been a big boost for fracking, which opened some new leases in federal lands, which, is fair. It's not quite the big picture here because one of the issues on the federal level with fracking and oil production is a lot of these leases are either getting hung up or not approved. It's kind of this years-long delay and source of frustration. But I think more broadly, when we're talking about the IRA and how it's affected energy, much of that funding has been going toward not so much, use of fracking, much more so toward renewable energy. Solar especially has been a big thing. Battery storage to basically save more solar energy. Wind has been a big thing. Basically, more than $400 billion has been earmarked for renewable energy through the IRA. And we see these projects in Pennsylvania. We see these projects in a bunch of other states. I think, broadly speaking, when we're talking about the Democratic approach in recent years to energy, there's a lot of subsidies going in for renewable projects. There's a little more openness toward nuclear power. Not completely. There's been some major setbacks with that, but compared to 20 years ago, Democrats seem more friendly to nuclear power. But there's also a little less opposition to fossil fuels. Maybe not so in the rhetoric, but I think there is a pragmatic angle here, as we've seen with the Biden administration, of, they may not favor oil and natural gas. Some state legislatures are looking to either potentially put in some bans or limit it in some ways. But at least at the federal level, we're seeing more engagement. Fracking's here to stay. We can't just get rid of natural gas, coal, these fossil fuels. They're not necessarily excited about it, but they're not as maybe antagonistic as we've seen a lot of rhetoric in the past decade.
And have either of the presidential candidates addressed energy much outside of the bounds of this debate?
Yes and no. We're getting a little bit of it here and there in their platforms. Harris is kind of pushing more these broad talking points about lowering household energy costs and creating hundreds of thousands of high-quality clean energy jobs and driving up energy production to record levels. Trump is arguing that his administration would unleash energy dominance if he gets reelected, basically getting rid of barriers for oil, natural gas, coal, basically taking advantage of what we've been doing and trying to either get rid of some barriers or restrictions or speed up some permitting processes. But it's hard to say, how much of this is political rhetoric versus how much of this will be an actual priority. And one of the big problems we see with energy, with electricity, with grid stability, we've seen in recent years blackouts and brownouts in California. We've seen the failure of the energy grid in Texas a few winters ago. And this all kind of belies, as renewable energy grows, the grid becomes less stable because these are intermittent sources of energy. We see a lot of interest growing in nuclear energy or in battery storage to make sure that when we do have wind and solar power, we can store that and then use it when those sources die down. But all of this is happening in the context of increasing energy demand. And we're seeing this in Texas. We're seeing this in the PJM energy grid. We're seeing a lot of delays with getting new energy projects, no matter what sort of energy they're using, getting connected into this grid. And I think the big question that's not necessarily being addressed here over the next 5 or 10 years is, where's this energy coming from? How are we going to speed up these projects? And are we going to avoid the entire nation seeing problems that we've seen in California and Texas? There's not really one united energy approach, because each energy grid, aside from Texas has its own, California has its own, but most energy grids are like PJM. They're multi-state. You have competing interests. You have competing state energy policies, and there's not one authority coordinating this, or there's not one person responsible for making sure that interconnections are happening, that transmission lines are being reinvested in and upkept. That seems to be the next problem we're facing on the state level, on the federal level. How do you not only increase energy production to meet demand, but how do you ensure the grid is working, that it's reliable, and that it's stable?
Well, Anthony, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.